Tonight, the picture opens the way American television so often does, with a breaking bulletin and a legend's face frozen on the screen. Little Richard, the volcanic architect of rock and roll, is remembered as an American original. A calm news voice marks his passing. Another segment rolls in, this time about the smoldering R&B of Teddy Pendergrass. The tone is respectful, polished, rehearsed. On the surface, it is all about the music. These were the gods of R&B. Men whose voices seemed able to baptize an entire nation, whose records slipped across racial lines, whose smiles filled glossy magazine covers from coast to coast. But behind the platinum plaques, behind the velvet tuxedos and endless tour buses, there was another narrative no one in the business wanted to touch. A story built from fear, from silence, and from the single rumor that could end an entire career overnight, the question of who these men really loved. For decades, the machine around them guarded that question with iron discipline. According to reports, publicists quietly rewrote biographies, managers rehearsed answers, and labels were said to have paid off reporters who got too curious. Families, when asked, denied everything. And still, the whispers slipped through dressing room doors and studio hallways. A mysterious letter that appeared where it shouldn't have. A missing videotape. A passenger who vanished from a hospital log. A lifelong friend who was never publicly named. A relationship that somehow never made the final cut of the documentary. 15 men, 15 lives, shaped not only by the music they created, but by the constant terror of being exposed. It was said they carried Grammys to their graves and their secrets with them. Tonight, we open the files they left behind, one by one. File 1, Luther Vandross, the velvet voice in a glass cage. His tone could melt steel, soft, immaculate, soaring until it felt like the ceiling might crack. Luther sang about romance as if he had lived 100 different love stories. But according to people around him, the reality was much colder. Away from the spotlight, Luther moved through life like someone sealed behind museum glass, admired from a distance, rarely touched up close. All through the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, he steered clear of public relationships entirely. That decision fed a hunger he was believed to have soothed with food. By 1983, he had reportedly put on close to 80 pounds, slipping away from cameras, canceling photo shoots, even firing stylists who suggested he adjust his image. The breaking point came on July 16, 1985. A New York gossip magazine ran a pointed headline, "Who is the man behind Luther?" The piece implied that a male companion had been traveling with him for months. The article never printed a name, never showed a face, but its impact was immediate. Within hours, Epic Records is said to have canceled every interview Luther had booked that month. Publicists scrubbed entire press kits, shredding photos that captured Luther standing near unfamiliar men in backstage corridors. The humiliation stayed behind closed doors, but the damage it did to him never really healed. A backup singer later claimed that Luther walked into rehearsal the next day looking almost colorless, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the floor. He wouldn't joke, he wouldn't chat, he refused to eat in front of the crew. For the first time, the people who worked with him every day began to understand just how fragile the man behind that immaculate voice truly was. From that moment on, Luther built walls no one could climb. He traveled with fewer people. He personally approved every photograph before it left the room. He declined any question that strayed too close to his private life. To one friend he trusted completely, he is remembered as whispering the truth of his loneliness. "I sing about love because I know what it feels like to want it." He died with the world convinced he had everything: money, fame, adoration. But the one thing he spent his career singing about may have been the one thing he never felt safe claiming. 2. Marvin Gaye, the prophet haunted by his own shadow. Marvin Gaye moved through the 1,970 seconds like a spiritual seer, a man who could stare into America's wounds and translate them into melody. What's going on? Let's get it on. Sexual healing. The world worshipped his genius and called it soul. But while people praised his courage on the microphone, Marvin was fighting a private war no one could see. Cocaine, paranoia, explosive clashes with his father. All of it chipped away at him, pushing him further into the dark corners of his own mind. Then came the discovery that fractured what little peace he had left. In August 1982, a Motown employee privately admitted he had found a stack of personal letters in Marvin's old Los Angeles office. Letters that, according to that employee, were not addressed to women. The worker leaked the story to a journalist who quietly started asking questions. Drafts were outlined, phone calls were made. The article never went to print, but the rumor of it reached Marvin within days. According to his bodyguard, Marvin read a message about the letters during a rehearsal, went completely still, then walked out of the studio without a word. Within 72 hours, he had left the country. By August 20th, he was in Ostend, Belgium. No entourage, no friends, no public explanation, just silence. In Europe, Marvin lived like a fugitive who believed someone was always one step behind him. He kept the curtains pinned shut. He spoke in whispers over the phone. Visitors were instructed to come through the back entrance only. Locals said he paced his apartment late at night, convinced somebody was listening through the walls. He refused to open fan mail. He stopped trusting almost everyone, except his dog. Even as he recorded Midnight Love, he was said to constantly glance over his shoulder. Friends claimed Marvin believed those letters, if they ever surfaced, could destroy everything, not only his career, but the way people understood his life. No one outside that circle ever saw the alleged documents. No one could prove they existed, but the fear they created in him was real. It hollowed him out from the inside. When Marvin finally returned to the United States in 1983, he seemed older than his years, worn down, distant. He looked like a prophet who had stared into his own abyss for too long. Less than a year later, he was gone, still convinced, according to people close to him, that somewhere, someone was waiting to expose the part of himself he never felt safe showing. 3. Teddy Pendergrass, the king brought down by a mystery passenger. Teddy Pendergrass was R&B's undisputed sex symbol, a storm of leather, sweat, and raw fire. Women fainted at his concerts. Men measured themselves against his charisma. On stage, no one seemed more in command of his fate. But that illusion shattered in one violent instant. March 18, 1982, 1:20 a.m., Lincoln Drive in Philadelphia. Teddy's Rolls-Royce slammed into a tree, crushing the front of the car and snapping his spine. He survived barely. The world focused on the tragedy of a star suddenly paralyzed. But inside police files, there was a detail that raised more questions than the crash itself: the passenger. The police report listed the person in the seat beside Teddy only as John Doe, a figure who gave nothing more than a first name and then disappeared from the hospital within hours. Nurses later said they were instructed not to speak to reporters, not to describe the passenger, not to answer questions that went beyond basic facts. Teddy's management moved with brutal speed. According to staff, they shut the story down, confiscated visitor logs, and restricted which medical personnel could even approach his room. Rumors erupted in the vacuum. Who was this passenger? Why was the identity sealed? Why did Teddy, a man known for swagger and directness, refuse to address the circumstances of that night for the rest of his life? Friends claimed that after the crash, Teddy was not the same man. He fired longtime associates. He pulled back from old social circles. He avoided cameras unless he could control every angle, every frame, every shadow. In his hospital room, he reportedly kept a small notebook on the tray beside his bed, writing down names and sometimes drawing a line through them. No one ever learned what the list meant. One nurse from Thomas Jefferson Hospital remembered a moment she could never forget. Teddy woke from surgery in tears, gripping her wrist and asking over and over, "Did they talk to anyone? Did they say anything?" The fear in his voice, she said, sounded deeper than pain. It sounded like terror. Teddy did what few believed possible. He came back to music, reclaimed stages, and sang with new resilience. The world called it courage, and it was. But the shadow of that night on Lincoln Drive never really left him. The passenger's identity was never officially confirmed, never publicly investigated, never truly resolved. Teddy Pendergrass carried that silence, and whatever truth was bound to it, to his grave. 4. Donny Hathaway, the genius who heard voices. Brilliance came to Donny Hathaway like a curse. His mind was razor-sharp, too open, too exposed to every sound in the room. What the world heard as genius, he often felt as torment. By 1977, Atlantic Records had quietly assembled a private medical team around him, not out of compassion alone, but to keep his condition from reaching the press, anything that might, as one internal memo was said to phrase it, damage the image of a strong, masculine soul icon, had to be buried. But Donny was slipping. He heard voices. He saw shapes in the corners that no one else could see. In the studio, he begged engineers to check microphones for hidden transmitters, convinced someone was listening in. On January 12, 1979, inside Chicago's Universal Recording Studios, Donny stepped out of a vocal booth in the middle of a take. He leaned in close to producer Rick Powell and whispered, "They're following me. They know who I spend my nights with." Powell later said he never forgot the way Donny stressed that one word, they. Donny refused to explain who they were. Hours before his death, the very next night, Donny phoned a friend in a panic. He said someone had stolen a notebook from his apartment, a notebook he used to document private encounters he was terrified might be exposed if the wrong hands found it. The notebook was never recovered. At 11:03 p.m., Donny Hathaway was found on the sidewalk outside the Essex House Hotel, having fallen from the 15th floor. Police called it suicide. Others, then and now, quietly call it fear. His hospital bracelet, later discovered in his coat, had been scratched almost to the point of tearing apart, as if he'd tried to erase his own name before the end. To this day, no one knows for certain who Donny believed they were, or what secrets he thought they held over him. 5. Billy Preston, the man caught between church and fame. Billy Preston lived in a split world, the strict, sanctified demands of the Pentecostal church on one side and the wild, electric chaos of the music industry on the other. His mother gripped him with scripture, insisting he remain a spotless Christian example. Managers, meanwhile, promoted him as a flamboyant, larger-than-life keyboard phenomenon. The collision between those identities was brutal. The moment that marked him forever took place on October 4th, 1974, at the BBC Television Centre. Billy was scheduled to tape with Elton John, a high-profile performance that should have been nothing but celebration. Instead, according to a stagehand who was there, Billy was seen in a deserted hallway, locked in an intense argument with an unidentified man. Witnesses later claimed the exchange felt personal, too personal, before the two men slipped behind a fire exit door. Minutes later, security reported that the unknown man had left the building without signing in, a serious breach of BBC protocol. When tabloids got wind of the confrontation, they spun it into suggestive questions about Billy's private life, questions the church community back home was not willing to tolerate. It was said that his mother demanded he return home immediately to correct the impression. Billy refused. He locked himself in his hotel room for 2 days and, according to hotel staff, smashed a lamp when a reporter knocked on his door. From that point on, Billy traveled like a man under siege. He insisted on separate dressing rooms, separate elevators, separate entrances, anything that might protect him from another accusation, another misunderstanding, another headline that could set the church against him or the industry against him. The man from that BBC hallway was never publicly identified. Footage from that night reportedly went missing, erased from archives that otherwise cataloged everything. 6. Jackie Wilson, the dangerous life of Mr. Excitement. Jackie Wilson moved on stage like a man possessed, hips snapping, sweat flying, women screaming, until security could barely hold the barriers. But when the curtain dropped, he walked back into a world defined by violence, secrets, and carefully curated performances of masculinity. The moment that exposed just how dangerous that world could be came on February 15, 1961, inside a Manhattan apartment. Police found Jackie with a bullet wound in his stomach. The official report claimed a jealous girlfriend had pulled the trigger. Case closed. But there was more on paper, at least for a moment. A second report, allegedly filed by an officer who later retired, suggested there were multiple fingerprints on the gun, including one that did not match Jackie or the woman accused. According to people familiar with the story, that report vanished within days. Whispers spread through clubs and back offices that Jackie had been seen earlier that evening leaving a midtown nightclub with a young male dancer. The dancer was never questioned. Managers from Brunswick Records reportedly arrived at the station before sunrise and demanded that any reference to unverified witnesses be removed from the file. By noon, a cleaned-up version of the report appeared, containing only the girlfriend's tearful confession and none of the conflicting details. The cover-up changed him. Jackie grew paranoid. He drank harder. He fired bodyguards for staring a second too long. On tour in 1963, he insisted hotel staff enter his room only when he was fully dressed, terrified of being caught off guard, out of character, vulnerable. Backstage, bandmates said he would slam locker doors and mutter under his breath, "They can't know, they can't know." Jackie Wilson died as Mr. Excitement, the explosive showman the public adored. But the real man, the wounded, frantic, fearful Jackie, who lived behind that facade, never stepped fully into the light again. 7. Little Richard, the man who ran from himself. People used to say Little Richard ran toward the stage like a man chasing salvation, desperate to reach the microphone before something else caught up with him. But the truth, according to those who watched him closely, was darker. He wasn't just running toward applause. He was running away from something, or someone, only he seemed to see. The night that Chase finally caught up to him came on October 9th, 1957, inside room 212 of a hotel in Sydney, Australia. A housekeeper pushed open the door to deliver fresh towels and stopped dead in her tracks. Beside Richard's vanity mirror stood a tall man in a gray suit, speaking in a low, urgent tone. The only words she remembered clearly were, "Too close, too familiar." Richard snapped his head toward the doorway with a look she would later describe as pure terror. Within minutes, she reported what she had seen to the tour manager. Within an hour, the entire tour was canceled. Richard packed just 2 suitcases and demanded an immediate flight back to the United States. The public explanation was simple: a religious vision, a sudden calling from God. But the insider's version was different. It was said that Richard believed something private had been compromised, something that, if it reached the American press, could obliterate his career and reputation overnight. Before boarding his plane, a roadie reportedly found Richard locked in the bathroom, tearing photographs from a scrapbook and flushing them down the toilet, page by page. Back in Georgia, he gathered his flamboyant stage outfits, threw them into a metal drum, drenched them in gasoline, and set them on fire while shouting about demons and damnation. And yet, only about 6 months later, he stormed back into rock and roll with explosive energy, as if trying to outrun that Sydney memory all over again. For decades, he swung wildly between extremes: preacher 1 month, dazzling peacock showman, the next each transformation looking less like reinvention and more like an attempt to smother whatever truth had haunted that hotel room. To close friends, he reportedly confessed only once, in a moment of raw honesty: "If they knew who I really was, they'd burn my records." Little Richard didn't just make rock and roll dangerous. He lived like danger, walked 1 step behind him every single day. 8. Sam Cooke, the gentleman surrounded by secrets. The official story of Sam Cooke starts with his voice, smooth as glass, the sound that melted radio stations and rewrote the rules for black performers in mainstream America. But the real story, the one whispered in green rooms, precinct hallways, and FBI offices, begins with the man who followed him. The first sighting came on March 2nd, 1964, backstage at the Miami Auditorium. A security guard noticed a stranger standing in the shadows, dressed in a dark suit, hands clasped, expression cold and unreadable. He wasn't singing along, wasn't cheering, just watching Sam rehearse. When the guard moved toward him, the man slipped away without a word. 2 days later, Sam spotted him again, this time in the back rows of the Chicago Regal Theater. Same suit, same posture, same dead, unwavering stare. This time Sam saw him first and demanded security remove the man. But when guards reached the row, the seat was empty. No ticket, no entry log, no name. The third sighting happened in Cleveland. A fan, unsettled by the figure lingering in the distance, snapped a blurry photo and handed the film to local police. Within 24 hours, the negative vanished from the evidence room. No explanation, no trace. At that same time, Sam Cooke was under FBI surveillance for his involvement in the civil rights movement. Agents tapped phones, monitored hotel check-ins, and quietly questioned members of his band. Rumors spread that someone or several someones were trying to build a narrative around Sam, a story that could weaken his growing political influence if it ever needed to be unleashed. Then came December 11th, 1964, the night Sam Cooke was shot in a Los Angeles motel. Official reports didn't quite match witness statements. The motel manager changed her story more than once. A bellhop later claimed he saw a man in a dark suit slipping out a side exit just before police arrived. Some people called Sam paranoid. Others, looking at the surveillance, the missing photo, the contradictions, said paranoia might have been the only rational response. To this day, no one can say for sure whether the man in the dark suit was real, part of an organized effort, or simply the shape of the secrets that weighed on Sam Cooke's shoulders. 9. Al Green, the preacher hiding a storm. Before Al Green became the image of a redeemed preacher wrapped in a suit and holding a Bible, he was a man trying to outrun a ghost. Not a nameless fear, a ghost with a face. The sightings began after the infamous October 18, 1974 hot grits incident, when Al was rushed to the hospital with serious burns. As he healed and shifted his focus fully toward religion, congregants at the Memphis Tabernacle started noticing someone lurking just beyond the sanctuary doors. A tall man in a trench coat, leaning against the oak tree across the street, always watching. The first confirmed sighting was January 12, 1975, after an evening service. A choir member said the man stood perfectly still and didn't blink. Other churchgoers reported seeing him again on January 26th, February 2nd, and February 9th, always alone, always silent, always staring at the exact door Al used to enter and exit. On February 2nd, a deacon decided to follow him. The man slipped into a narrow side corridor near the church. When the deacon turned the corner, the hallway was empty. The doors were locked. The windows were sealed. There was no exit. Rumors spread fast. Some said he was a former associate from the music world. Others called him a jealous rival. A few whispered that the man carried information that could ruin a ministry if it ever reached the right ears. When reporters started phoning with questions, Al shut down. He canceled interviews, doubled his security, and quietly changed the routes he drove to and from the church. In 1976, a journalist cornered him after a sermon and asked directly about the man in the trench coat. Witnesses said Al went completely silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he simply walked away without answering. During late-night Bible studies, one attendee later recalled hearing Al murmur under his breath, "Some sins don't die, they just wait in the dark." No one in the room had the courage to ask what he meant or whose sin he was talking about. The man outside the church was never identified. His name never made it into any official record. Al Green's silence about him lasted the rest of his life. 10. Rick James, the funk god in a cage of rumors. The story of Rick James usually gets told in neon colors: cocaine, arrests, chaos, excess. But the file that matters here doesn't start with drugs or headlines. It starts with a tape so volatile it was locked away before the public even knew it existed. According to an MTV employee at the time, the video arrived at headquarters on May 17, 1983, inside an unmarked envelope. It allegedly showed Rick backstage on the Cold-Blooded tour, embracing a male dancer in a way executives believed would trigger a firestorm if it ever aired. The moment the footage was screened, alarms went off figuratively, if not literally. This wasn't Rick, the outrageous funk superstar. This was Rick unmasked. Managers rushed to the building, demanded the original tape, and ordered that every copy be erased. One intern later claimed that Rick himself stormed into MTV around midnight, sunglasses on, jaw clenched tight, shouting, "No one sees that, no one." After that, the tape reportedly disappeared into a vault and then into legend. But rumors don't vanish with videotape. Fans began noticing changes. It was said that Rick abruptly replaced his entire dance crew. People around him claimed he banned cameras backstage and refused to walk into dressing rooms unless every mirror was covered. During a rehearsal in 1984, Rick reportedly spotted the red recording light on a camcorder, walked straight over, and smashed it under his boot, yelling, "No more surprises. I know how they trap you." By the late 1980s, Rick's life was spiraling in every direction, legally, financially, chemically. Underneath it all, those close to him said paranoia had taken root. He saw betrayal everywhere, especially among men he once trusted. A bandmate remembered him sleeping with furniture pushed up against his hotel door, terrified that someone from his past would show up with a copy of that night. The tape has never publicly resurfaced. Some insist it was destroyed. Others believe at least one copy still exists, hidden away, waiting for the right or the wrong moment. 11. Barry White, the lover with a locked file. Barry White built an empire on seduction, silk suits, dim lights, orchestras that sounded like a slow heartbeat under every whispered promise. The deeper his public persona as the ultimate ladies' man grew, the more desperately he seemed to hide the one detail that didn't fit the script. The legend begins with a photograph, one that has never seen the light of day. In August 1979, a paparazzi photographer in Nassau reportedly caught Barry walking along the beach with a male fashion designer he'd been collaborating with. The image itself wasn't scandalous for what they were doing, but for what it implied. In an era obsessed with rigid ideas of masculinity, it was enough to threaten the narrative the label had spent years and millions shaping. Within 48 hours, executives from 20th Century Records were said to have tracked down the photographer, bought the negatives for an enormous sum, and, according to his account, burned them with a lighter in the parking lot. He claimed Barry watched from the back seat of a black limousine, face unreadable through the glass. After that, Barry moved differently. Concert workers whispered that he demanded backstage hallways be cleared before he walked through. Assistants noticed a locked file in his office marked with a simple warning: "Personal, do not open." Even those closest to him understood the line. Whatever lived in that folder stayed there, into the 1990 seconds. As his health faltered, tabloid reporters circled. One journalist allegedly tried to bribe a former stylist, insisting the industry had been shielding Barry's real story for decades. The stylist refused, but later recalled Barry once telling him, "A lover can break your heart, but the wrong rumor can break your legacy." In his final years, Barry guarded his image with the same careful precision he brought to every arrangement, every string section, every bass line. Whatever was in that locked file, he never surrendered it. He carried it, like so many other men in this story, all the way to the grave. 12. Bobby Womack, the dangerous rebel. If most R&B stars learned to move carefully, Bobby Womack seemed determined to do the opposite. He lived like he was daring the world to keep up, marrying Sam Cooke's widow, brawling with bandmates, drifting deeper into addiction. Almost every scandal that touched him was loud, public, unforgettable. But the rumor that nearly broke him didn't come from a woman or a public betrayal. It came from a man who rarely left his side. In March 1986, Bobby showed up at the Soul Train offices with a new assistant, a quiet young man named Marcus. He walked 2 steps behind Bobby, carried his bags, opened his doors, finished sentences in interviews. The media called Marcus mysterious. Fans called him too familiar. By summer, curiosity had hardened into questions. Headlines started to ask, "What is Bobby Womack hiding?" The breaking point arrived on July 22, 1986, during a press conference in Detroit. A reporter asked straight out if Marcus was more than an assistant. Bobby slammed his fist on the table, stood up, and stormed out. Within hours, he fired his entire PR team for allowing the question to slip through. Behind the scenes, things only got stranger. Crew members said Bobby and Marcus always booked adjoining hotel rooms, but insisted on using side exits to dodge photographers. One eyewitness recalled seeing Bobby shove Marcus against a backstage wall during an argument, hissing, "You don't get to ruin me." 2 weeks later, Marcus was gone. No farewell post, no press release, no quiet explanation to the crew. His name disappeared from staff lists as if he had never existed. Even at the lowest points of his addiction, when Bobby admitted to almost everything else, people close to him said he shut down completely whenever someone mentioned the year 1986. Some stories fade as the years pass. That one seemed to grow heavier, darker, each time someone tried to bring it into the light. 13. Johnny Gill, the voice surrounded by whispers. Johnny Gill entered New Edition as the grown-up, the powerful baritone brought in to stabilize a group that had grown up under constant chaos. But stability was the one thing he never truly had. From the moment the spotlight hit him, the industry seemed more interested in his silence than in his sound. The first major rumor ignited in February 1990, when a Los Angeles radio host hinted on air that Johnny was living with a close male friend during album rehearsals. No names, no photos, just enough detail to light a match. Within 24 hours, tabloids across the country ran variations of the story, each version more breathless than the last. Over the next 15 years, more than 20 articles repeated similar allegations, backstage sightings, unnamed insiders, grainy photos of Johnny standing too close to bandmates or friends. One magazine even claimed he shared a private home in Atlanta with a famous R&B star. That piece almost cost the editor his job. The most explosive moment came on June 3, 1996, when Johnny received a draft of a tabloid exposé, allegedly detailing his secret relationships. He called his lawyer immediately and prepared to fight. And then, just before printing, the story vanished. Sources went quiet. Documents were pulled. Industry insiders believed someone powerful had stepped in. After that, Johnny changed his behavior in ways only those around him could see. He skipped after-parties. He refused to take photos with male fans unless other people were in the frame. In one interview, he reportedly stopped mid-sentence and walked out when the host steered the conversation toward his dating life. Bandmates said a permanent tension settled over him, the look of a man always bracing for the next headline. Years later, when asked why he thought the rumors never stopped, Johnny reportedly answered, "Some people don't want the truth. They just want a story." In his case, the story seemed determined to follow him, no matter how carefully he walked. 14. Charlie Wilson, the Gap Band survivor. Before Charlie Wilson became the smiling elder statesman of R&B clean, celebrated, reborn, there was a decade he almost didn't live through. Addiction nearly killed him. Homelessness nearly erased him. But long before he hit rock bottom, there was a rumor that had already begun to chew away at him from the inside. The story opens on a rain-soaked night in November 1987 inside a dim recording studio in North Hollywood. According to a former technician, Charlie returned after midnight, exhausted, eyes glassy, accompanied by a man the staff didn't recognize. What happened next has survived only as a whisper. The tech claimed he saw Charlie holding the man close behind the curtain of the vocal booth, nothing explicit, but something intimate enough that, in that time and environment, it could ruin careers. By 8 a.m., label executives were on site. The technician said he was escorted into an office and told in no uncertain terms to forget what he had seen. A non-disclosure agreement slid across the table. He was allegedly threatened with being blacklisted from every major West Coast studio if he spoke. Within 24 hours, he was removed from the project entirely. Charlie, according to people around him, was never directly confronted. He was simply insulated. The rumor, however, was out of the bottle. From then on, crew members noticed changes. Charlie became skittish during sessions. He refused to linger after recording. He avoided closed doors. One night, he reportedly ordered that every reflective surface in the control room be covered with towels. "Nothing watching me," he muttered. When Charlie fell into homelessness in the early 1992, sleeping behind dumpsters off Hollywood Boulevard, those who knew him said he carried not only the shame of addiction, but a lingering fear that the story from 1987 would resurface and finish whatever slim chance he had left at a career. Even after rehab, even after the unlikely triumphant comeback, Charlie Wilson refused to discuss that year in any detail. Some wounds stay stitched shut because opening them could destroy the person who survived them. 15. Gerald Levert, the Prince of Quiet Storm. Gerald Levert had a voice built for late-night confessions, velvety, trembling, almost painfully honest. But the one confession that mattered most, the one that may have explained everything, was the one he never spoke out loud. His story takes a darker turn after his sudden death on November 10, 2006. That night, family members entered his Cleveland home to secure his belongings, gathering the pieces of a life that had ended too soon. What they found, and then erased, became one of R&B's quietest mysteries. According to someone who claimed to be there, Gerald's cell phone would not stop vibrating. Messages poured in, condolences from friends, colleagues, industry power players. But one thread stood out, a conversation with a contact saved under a single initial. Those texts were frantic, emotional, painfully intimate. The last message, sent just 2 hours before Gerald's fatal collapse, read, "Please don't shut me out again. I'm on my way." The family allegedly deleted the entire conversation before handing the phone to authorities. In the weeks that followed, strange details surfaced and then disappeared. A man dressed in black supposedly came to Gerald's studio at 1:30 a.m. asking to retrieve private documents. Security turned him away. He never returned. A producer said Gerald often left sessions abruptly after late-night calls, coming back with red eyes, either furious or heartbroken. In his office, certain photographs were missing from frames. A handwritten note was reportedly torn into pieces and flushed down a studio toilet. Under his bed, they found a suitcase filled with letters no one was allowed to read. Publicly, Gerald was the ultimate ladies' man, smooth, charming, endlessly romantic. Privately, it was said he moved through a maze of secrecy built to shield one person, the man his family worked so hard to erase from the narrative. Whatever truth Gerald carried, he took with him. The silence wrapped around those final messages remains one of Quiet Storm's darkest, softest echoes. In the end, these 15 men gave the world almost everything a person can offer. Their voices, their brilliance, their youth, their sanity. But the one truth that defined them most deeply stayed locked behind their ribs until the very moment their hearts stopped beating. They sang about love, yet many of them died terrified of never being loved for who they really were. They filled arenas and stadiums, yet still left this world, in crucial ways, alone. And the same industry that praised them for their emotional honesty on record was the machine that punished them quietly, ruthlessly, for any honesty off stage. Every rumor, every missing photograph, every erased voicemail, every midnight knock on a studio door, every nurse told not to talk, they all point in the same direction. This is not just a story about sexuality, not just a logbook of scandal. It is a story about fear weaponized, monetized, and built into the walls of an entire business. A fear so deep it followed these men into every hotel room, every limousine, every green room, every pew. Now that they are gone, what we have left are fragments, echoes, half-truths, redacted files, whispers shared in hushed tones, and the ghosts of men who deserve to breathe, sing, and love without hiding. So, I'll leave you with this. Did we really just love their music, or did we help build the closet that slowly killed them? If you want the next file opened, you already know what comes next. Stay close, stay listening,